I knew it was a mistake the second I crossed that invisible line into Crimson Vale territory. The crumpled rejection letter from the Southern Coalition was still clutched in my fist, getting damper by the minute from my sweaty palm. 3 packs had turned me away already. This was my last shot, and it was a desperate one. The path narrowed between 2 massive oaks, their leaves already turning burnt orange and blood red with the coming autumn. I stopped to catch my breath, my worn backpack digging into my shoulders. Everything I owned was in that pack. Wasn't much, but it was mine. "You're being stupid, Christina," I muttered to myself, adjusting the fraying strap cutting into my collarbone. Turning up on Gregory Weber's doorstep? Might as well offer your throat directly. Everyone knew about Weber, most ruthless alpha in the Eastern Territories. Old school in the worst ways. But winter was coming, and an Omega without a pack doesn't survive winter alone. Not out here. My mother had warned me about places like this before she died. The old territories operate by old rules, she'd said. And those rules weren't made to protect people like us. But Mom had run from these territories 20 years ago. Maybe things had changed. I needed to believe that. The forest thinned as I approached their border gate. A massive wooden structure carved with their pack symbol, a wolf's head with 3 claw marks running through it. 2 guards lounged against the frame, straightening when they caught my scent on the wind. Well, the bigger one said, nudging his partner. "Look what the wind blew in." The leaner guard sniffed obviously in my direction. "Smells like trouble and desperation." I kept my eyes lowered, standard approach for an Omega in strange territory. No sense starting trouble when I was outnumbered and outranked. "I've come to request an audience with Alpha Weber." They both laughed, and the sound made the hair on my neck stand up. "Have you now?" The bigger one, I'd later learn was Terry, looked me up and down. "And what's a scrawny little nobody like you got to offer the Alpha of Crimson Vale?" My threadbare jacket and patched jeans told my whole story. No pack, no protection, no status. Just another Omega drifting between territories, looking for sanctuary. "It's the harvest moon," I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze briefly. Pack law says any wolf can request sanctuary during the harvest moon. Even me, the leaner guard, Donald, spat on the ground near my boots. "She knows the old laws, Terry. Doesn't mean we have to make it easy." Terry's hand dropped to the knife at his belt. "Strip search first, standard procedure." My heart hammered against my ribs. "That's not—" "He's messing with you," Donald cut in, shooting his partner a look. "Unfortunately, she's right. Can't turn away a petition during harvest moon. Not without the Alphas say so." Terry shrugged, looking disappointed. "Fine. Arms out." I raised my arms while they patted me down, their hands lingering longer than necessary. I bit my tongue till I tasted copper. "Pick your battles, Christina." "Clean," Terry announced, stepping back. "Except for the stink of failure." He plucked the rejection letter from my hand, unfolding it with theatrical slowness. "We regret to inform you that the Southern Coalition cannot accept unaffiliated Omegas at this time." He read aloud, voice mockingly formal. "Our resources are strained, and without pack references or valuable skills. Harsh." He tossed the letter back at me. 3 rejections in 1 month. You're collecting them." I snatched the paper from the air, shoving it into my pocket. "Are you done?" Donald checked the sun's position. "Almost dinner. Alpha Weber will be in the Great Hall." He nudged Terry. "Let's get this over with." They flanked me as we walked through the settlement, making sure everyone got a good look at the pathetic outsider. The Crimson Vale compound was bigger than I'd expected. At least 30 cabins arranged around a central meeting area, with a massive log structure dominating the far end. Smoke curled from stone chimneys, carrying the smell of cooking meat that made my stomach growl audibly. "Hungry?" Terry asked. "Maybe if you beg prettily, Alpha will throw you some scraps." I kept my mouth shut. Hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but I'd be damned if I'd give him the satisfaction. The Great Hall loomed ahead, its entrance flanked by carved wolf statues with ruby eyes that caught the setting sun. Inside, the air was heavy with wood smoke and the lingering scent of pack, that distinctive blend of individuals living in close proximity that forms a territorial marker stronger than any fence. "Wait here," Donald ordered, pointing to a worn spot on the wooden floor near the entrance. I stood where instructed, eyes adjusting to the dimness. The hall stretched longer than I'd thought, with a massive stone fireplace at the far end and heavy wooden tables arranged throughout. Only one figure occupied the space, a mountain of a man bent over maps spread across the central table. Even from a distance, Gregory Weber radiated power, 6'4" at least, with shoulders that strained the seams of his expensive black Henley. His hands, mapping out territory lines with deliberate precision, looked capable of crushing a windpipe without effort. "Alpha," Terry called out. "Got an Omega at the gate requesting sanctuary." Weber didn't look up immediately. He finished marking something on the map before raising his head, dark eyes cutting across the room to where I stood. A chill ran through me, like someone had walked over my future grave. "Bring her forward," he said, voice deep and controlled. The guards nudged me ahead, and I forced my legs to move. Each step across that hall felt like walking deeper into a trap I was setting for myself. Up close, Weber was even more intimidating. The artificial light cast shadows across the planes of his face, highlighting a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes so deeply brown they appeared black. A long scar ran down his left forearm, disappearing beneath his rolled sleeve, the mark of a challenge fight by the look of it. "Name and former pack," he demanded without preamble. I swallowed hard. "Christina Perez, formerly of the Blue Ridge Pack." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Blue Ridge disbanded 3 years ago." "Yes, Alpha." "And you've been without pack protection since then?" His gaze raked over me, taking in my worn clothes and the tension in my stance. "I've been moving around, seasonal work mostly." I pulled the rejection letter from my pocket, offering it with a hand I forced not to tremble. The Southern Coalition was my last option before winter. He didn't take the letter, just stared at it like I was offering him trash, which in a way, I was. Why come to Crimson Vale? His voice remained neutral, but something in his eyes had changed, a calculating interest that made my skin crawl. "Our reputation isn't exactly welcoming to strays." The truth seemed safest. "Because you're my last option. Winter's coming, and I won't survive it alone. The old laws say you have to at least hear my petition during Harvest Moon." "The old laws," he repeated, a smile ghosting across his lips. "Not many remember those anymore." He circled around me slowly, like a predator sizing up prey, not aggressive exactly, but assessing. I kept my eyes forward, fighting every instinct screaming at me to run. "What skills do you bring to my pack?" he asked from behind me. "I can hunt, track, preserve food. I worked kitchen in 3 different territories. I'm good with pups." The words tumbled out, desperate. "I don't need much, just a place through winter." He completed his circle, stopping directly in front of me. This close, his scent was overwhelming, pine and smoke and raw power. "We have specific needs in Crimson Vale," Weber said, reaching out to lift my chin with one finger, forcing my eyes to his. "Our bloodlines need strengthening, particularly the Omega lines." My stomach dropped. There it was, the real price of sanctuary. "I'm not looking for a mate," I said carefully. His smile widened, showing teeth. "Omegas in my territory don't have the luxury of such preferences." The guards shifted behind me, blocking the path to the door without being obvious about it. Weber's fingers still held my chin, his touch deceptively gentle. "We could use fresh breeding stock," he continued, as if discussing livestock. "You're young, healthy, good bone structure." I wanted to spit in his face. Instead, I forced myself to remain still, mind racing for a way out of this that wouldn't get me killed on the spot. "I'm requesting temporary sanctuary," I said, keeping my voice steady, "not permanent placement." Weber dropped his hand, but his eyes never left mine. "Sanctuary has its price, Christina Perez. Everyone pays it one way or another." Standing there in that great hall, with winter approaching and nowhere else to go, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Death in the wilderness might be kinder than whatever this man had planned for me, but I was already caught in his web, those dark eyes watching me like I was already his property. I'd come seeking protection from the elements, only to find myself face to face with a predator far more dangerous than any winter storm. "I'm offering you a position, Christina Perez. 1 year as my personal servant." The way he said it made my skin crawl, Not a job offer, a collar. And what exactly would that entail? I kept my voice steady despite the knot forming in my gut. You'll tend to my quarters, organize my correspondence, run errands, simple duties. His smile didn't reach his eyes. In exchange, you'll have shelter, food, protection through winter. When spring comes, you can stay or go, provided you fulfilled your obligation. Terry snickered behind me. I ignored him. And if I refuse? Weber shrugged. Then you leave, now, tonight, and never return to Crimson Vale territory. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Outside, darkness was falling. No shelter, no food, nowhere to go with winter breathing down my neck. There's one more thing, Weber's voice cut through my thoughts. The position requires a blood oath, a binding to ensure your loyalty. My mother's warnings echoed in my head. Blood oaths weren't just promises, they were magical contracts, enforced by consequences built into your body. Break them, and they broke you. I've heard things about your servants. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Have you now? Weber's eyebrows rose slightly. I had. Whispers from wolves passing through Blue Ridge territory before our pack disbanded. Stories about Weber's personal servants, always Omegas, who emerged from his service changed. Their eyes hollow, like something inside had been scraped out. No one ever said exactly what happened to them, but the implications were clear enough. Just rumors, I mumbled. Rumors often contain a kernel of truth. Weber stood circling the table, but they rarely tell the whole story. My servants are treated fairly, provided they fulfill their obligations. Donald cleared his throat. Alpha, the shaman is waiting. Weber nodded. The choice is yours, Christina. 1 year of service or walk back out those gates. Decide now. Some choice. Death by exposure or whatever Weber had planned for me, but at least the second option gave me time. Time to figure something out, to survive, maybe even escape if things got bad. I accept your offer, I said, the words tasting like ash. Excellent. Weber's smile widened. Terry, fetch Walter. The guard disappeared through a side door. Donald remained, watching me like I might bolt. Smart of him, I was considering it. The minutes stretched painfully before Terry returned with an older man. Walter Turner looked exactly like what you'd expect from a pack shaman. Long silver-streaked black hair in a tight braid, weathered copper skin, and penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see straight through you. The ritual scars on his forearms marked him as old school, trained in traditions most modern packs had abandoned. This is the one? Walter's voice had that sonorous quality shamans cultivated. Weber nodded. Prepare the binding. Walter set a small wooden box on the table and opened it with deliberate movements. Inside lay a curved silver knife, a small clay bowl, and various pouches of what I assumed were herbs or powders. He worked silently, measuring pinches of different substances into the bowl. Your hand, Walter finally said, extending his palm toward me. I hesitated. Once done, this couldn't be undone. Not without consequences I couldn't imagine. Second thoughts? Weber asked softly. The gates are still open. I extended my hand. Walter grasped my wrist with surprising strength and turned my palm upward. The silver knife flashed, and a line of fire traced across my skin. Blood welled up, dripping into the bowl. Weber offered his hand next, unflinching as Walter opened his palm with the same blade. Their blood mingled in the bowl, an ugly brownish mixture that seemed to move with a life of its own. Walter began chanting in the old tongue, words that slipped past my understanding but resonated in my bones. He sprinkled some powder that flashed blue when it hit the blood. The mixture bubbled without heat. Repeat after me, Walter said, his eyes fixed on mine. I, Christina Perez, bind myself to the service of Alpha Gregory Weber for the period of 1 full year. I swallowed hard and repeated the words. I swear to obey his commands, keep his confidences, and serve his interests above all others until the debt is paid. Each word felt heavier than the last as I spoke them. Walter nodded, satisfied, then dipped his thumb into the mixture and pressed it against my forehead. The blood felt cold, then suddenly burned like dry ice. I gasped as something invisible slithered through my veins, working its way down my spine and through my limbs. It is done, Walter announced. wiping his hands on a cloth. Weber smiled. How do you feel, Christina? Like I've got chains wrapped around my insides, I answered truthfully. The magic had settled somewhere deep in my core, a constant pressure that wasn't exactly painful but unmistakably present. That sensation will fade, Walter said, packing away his implements, though the binding remains, should you attempt to defy a direct command. He made a twisting gesture with his hands that required no further explanation. Weber dismissed the shaman with a nod. Terry will show you to the servants' quarters. You begin your duties tomorrow at sunrise. I followed Terry out of the great hall, legs wobbly beneath me. The binding magic made everything feel slightly off kilter, like I'd had too much to drink. You'll bunk here, Terry said, stopping at a small cabin near the back of the compound. Grace and Stephen will fill you in on your duties, he smirked. Enjoy your stay. The cabin was sparse, but clean. 4 narrow beds, simple wooden trunks, a small wood stove in the corner. 2 people looked up when I entered. A middle-aged woman with faded blonde hair and a younger man with a scar running down his cheek. New blood, the woman, Grace, I assumed, said flatly. Let me guess. Desperate Omega, nowhere else to go? I dropped my backpack on the empty bed. That obvious, huh? We've all been there, Stephen said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I'm Stephen, that's Grace. Christina. Grace stood and came closer, studying me. Blood oath? I nodded. Shit, she sighed. Well, listen up. First rule, do exactly what he says, not what you think he means. Second rule, stay out of his way unless called. Third rule, never, ever talk about pack business to outsiders. Is it that bad? I asked. The knot in my stomach tightening. Stephen and Grace exchanged glances. It's not the work, Stephen said carefully. The duties are straightforward enough. Clean his quarters, sort his mail, run messages, prepare his schedule. It's him, Grace added. Something's not right with Weber, the way he watches us, especially the new ones. What do you mean? You'll see, Grace said. Just be careful. Don't be alone with him more than necessary. I didn't sleep much that night, the binding magic pulsing through me like a second heartbeat. At dawn, Stephen showed me to Weber's private quarters, a spacious cabin separate from the main hall. He gave me a quick tour, explaining my duties in a hurried whisper before disappearing to his own tasks. The work itself wasn't difficult. I'd done harder labor for less reward. Weber's quarters needed cleaning, his correspondence needed organizing, his appointments needed scheduling. Simple, as promised. And after weeks of near starvation, the regular meals felt like luxury. I threw myself into it, determined to make the best of my situation. Keep my head down, follow orders, survive the year. I'd been through worse. At least here I had a roof, food, and a bed. But by the 3rd day, I noticed what Grace had meant. Weber watched me constantly when we were in the same room, not just keeping an eye on the help, something more intense, more focused. He'd find reasons to check my work, standing too close, his fingers occasionally brushing against mine accidentally. One morning, as I dusted his bookshelf, I felt his presence before I heard him. He stood in the doorway, just watching. You missed a spot, he finally said, pointing to a shelf I'd already cleaned twice. I reached for it again, stretching up on my toes. Weber moved behind me, his chest nearly touching my back. Allow me to help. His breath was warm against my ear as he reached up, trapping me between his body and the bookcase. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't about dusting. This wasn't about service. The way his scent changed, sharpened with something predatory, it confirmed everything I'd feared. When he finally stepped back, I kept my eyes down, focused on my work. But I knew then what I'd gotten myself into, and it was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just a year of servitude. It was a year of surviving a hunter who already considered me prey. Grace caught me shuddering one afternoon after I'd escaped his study. You all right? She asked, her voice low even though we were alone in the hall. Yeah, just... I rubbed my arms, trying to get rid of the crawling feeling. He doesn't blink enough. She snorted, but there wasn't any humor in it. You get used to it, sort of. But I didn't get used to it. Every day felt worse. He started finding reasons to be in the same room as me. If I was cleaning the Great Hall, suddenly he needed to review papers there. If I was organizing his bookshelf, he'd decide that was the perfect time to select something to read. One night, I was serving dinner to Weber and some of his lieutenants. They were talking about territory disputes with the neighboring Blackridge pack, voices getting louder as they argued strategy. I kept my head down, filling glasses and replacing empty platters. Weber barely acknowledged me, a relief after all the staring. I reached across to fill his glass, concentrating on not spilling the dark red wine. His hand moved suddenly, grabbing for the salt, and our fingers brushed. Just the lightest touch, skin against skin for maybe half a second. I jerked back, nearly dropping the bottle. Weber went completely still. When I looked up, his eyes had changed, pupils blown wide till there was barely any iris left. They looked wrong, like something else was looking through them. "You're dismissed," he said, voice tight. "Sir?" "Get out." His fingers gripped the edge of the table so hard I saw the wood flecks. I backed away, set the wine down, and left quick. Behind me, the conversation had died completely. I could feel their stares on my back all the way to the door. Stephen was waiting in the corridor, arms full of clean table linens. He took one look at my face and pulled me around the corner. "What happened?" he whispered. "I don't know." Our hands touched, and he just changed. My own hands were shaking. His eyes went all weird. Stephen cursed under his breath. "When's the full moon? 10 days? Maybe 11? I hadn't been keeping close track. He glanced around, then set down his stack of linens. "Listen to me. You need to make sure you're never alone with him from now till after the full, especially not at night." "Why? What happens during the full moon?" Grace appeared behind him, her face tight with worry. "Just don't. We can switch some duties around. I'll take his morning tea for the next 2 weeks." "But the binding—" "We'll work around it," Stephen cut in. "Trust us, please." They wouldn't say more, changing the subject whenever I tried to ask. But over the next few days, I noticed they were tag-teaming to keep me away from Weber. If he called for me, one of them would suddenly need my help with something urgent. If I was scheduled to clean his quarters, Grace would swap tasks with me. It wasn't just them acting strange either. The whole pack seemed to get edgier as the moon waxed. Guards doubled at night. People traveled in groups. I overheard one of the beta wolves telling his mate to keep their daughter indoors after sunset. Weber himself was different too, more agitated, prowling around the compound with his fists clenched. Twice I saw him staring at the moon, his face twisted with something that looked like hunger. "Has he always been like this?" I asked Grace one evening as we folded laundry. She kept her eyes on her work. "Like what?" "During the full moon, all intense." Her hands stilled for just a moment. "Some alphas have stronger reactions than others. Weber's are stronger than most." "Reactions to what?" She shook her head. "Just stay away from him, Christina. I'm not joking." I wanted to press, but the fear in her eyes stopped me. Whatever she wasn't saying, it terrified her. By my 3rd week of service, the moon had passed its full phase and things started to settle. Weber's intense staring resumed, but the strange tension in the air had faded. Grace and Stephen eased up on their protective hovering, though they still watched me with worried eyes. One morning, Weber instructed me to clean his private study while he attended a council meeting. This was new. He'd never left me alone in there before. "Don't touch anything on my desk," he warned before leaving. "Just dust the shelves and sweep. Nothing else." I nodded, keeping my eyes down. The second he was gone, I let out the breath I'd been holding. Being alone in his space felt both dangerous and like a chance to understand what I'd gotten myself into. His study was immaculate, walls lined with books and maps. I dusted carefully, eyes scanning titles. Histories of the old territories, bloodline records, magical treaties. Nothing seemed unusual until I reached the far corner, where a wooden cabinet stood partially open. I shouldn't have looked. The binding oath tugged at me, warning against snooping. But I'd only been told not to touch his desk. This cabinet wasn't his desk. Inside were stacks of leather-bound journals and folders. I pulled one out, half expecting the binding magic to punish me, but nothing happened. I opened it and froze. Family trees. Dozens of them, meticulously drawn with dates and notes in Weber's cramped handwriting. I flipped through pages, not understanding what I was seeing until a familiar name jumped out at me. Perez, my family name, right there on a yellowed page. Not just once, but connected to branches of other families, spreading across generations. My fingers trembled as I traced the lines. My grandmother's name, my mother's. And there, at the bottom of one branch, Christina Perez. My name was circled in red ink, with lines connecting me to something labeled Prime Omega Bloodlines. Notes filled the margins. Genetic compatibility confirmed. Third-generation carrier. Optimal breeding potential. I felt sick. What the hell was this? I flipped through more pages, finding similar charts for other families. Some names were crossed out, others circled like mine. My mother's maiden name, Harper, appeared repeatedly, always with the same notations about prime genetics. At the back of the folder was a letter dated 20 years ago. I scanned it quickly, catching phrases like Project Moonblood and Selective Breeding Program and genetic markers for enhanced transformation. My stomach lurched. I shoved the folder back and grabbed another, finding more of the same. Records of bloodlines, fertility cycles, genetic testing. And my family, always my family, tracked through generations. The binding magic pulsed a warning. Weber would return soon. I hastily replaced the folders, making sure everything looked untouched, and went back to dusting with shaking hands. My mind raced. This wasn't just about finding an Omega to serve the pack. Weber had been tracking my family for decades, had known exactly who I was when I arrived, had been waiting for me, and whatever he wanted me for had nothing to do with serving dinner or cleaning his study. It had everything to do with those words circled in red. Breeding potential. Find anything interesting? The voice froze me in place. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't caught his scent, too absorbed in the horror unfolding before me. I looked up slowly. Weber stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But there was something different in his eyes now, a hunger he wasn't bothering to disguise anymore. The journal slipped from my hands, hitting the floor with a damning thud. My voice cracked. I was just cleaning and... Save it. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a trap springing shut. The binding oath should be burning you from the inside out right now for touching what isn't yours. He was right. There was a dull, throbbing ache spreading through my chest, the magic enforcing his commands, but it was nothing compared to the cold fear washing through me. Weber moved toward his desk, never taking his eyes off me. He bent down, picked up the journal, and ran his fingers over the cover almost lovingly before setting it on his desk. You should see your face right now. His voice had changed, dropped any pretense of the stern but fair alpha. That look of betrayal, as if you ever had any real choice in coming here. I backed up until I hit the bookshelf, dust motes swirling in the shaft of afternoon light between us. You knew who I was, I said. Before I ever stepped foot in Crimson Vale, you knew. Weber smiled, showing teeth. I've known about you since before you were born, Christina Perez. He picked up a folder from his desk and flipped it open, casual as anything. Your mother was quite the problem for us. Harper had such potential, same bloodline as you, of course. The elders had arranged everything. She was to be bound to the previous alpha. He looked up at me. My father. The room seemed to tilt. I steadied myself against the shelf. But she ran, Weber continued, his voice hardening. Stole away in the night. Took with her what belonged to this pack. What belonged to my family. She didn't belong to anyone, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Weber's laugh was short and cruel. Such modern ideas. This is why the old territories struggle. Too many wolves forgetting their place in the natural order. He closed the folder with a snap. Your mother may have escaped, but she left a trail. Friends, distant relations, former packmates. Someone always talks eventually. I thought of all the places we'd lived, how we never stayed anywhere too long, the way my mother would stiffen whenever strange wolves came through town, the way she'd taught me to hide my scent, to blend in, to never draw attention. She'd known they were looking, all this time. The Southern Coalition, I whispered. The Blue Ridge Pack, the Silver Lake Alliance, They all rejected me because I made sure they would. Weber circled the desk, moving closer. It took some doing, calling in favors, making threats where necessary, but I couldn't have you settling anywhere else, could I? My mind raced back to those rejection letters, the vague excuses, the apologetic tones that never quite rang true, each one pushing me further north, closer to the old territories, until Crimson Vale was my only option. What do you want from me? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Weber leaned against his desk, studying me like I was a prize animal at auction. You really have no idea what you are, do you? What makes your bloodline so special? He shook his head in something like wonder. Once per generation, the Perez line produces an omega with a very particular genetic marker. Your mother had it. Now you do. He pushed off from the desk and took another step toward me. I had nowhere left to retreat. That marker means you can stabilize an alpha's power during transformation. Make us stronger, and any offspring you bear will carry that strength. His eyes gleamed with something ancient and hungry. Do you have any idea how valuable that makes you? The dust cloth I'd been holding fell from my numb fingers. Everything about Weber's behavior these past weeks clicked into terrible focus. The watching, the hovering, the way his pupils had dilated when our hands touched. That's why you offered me the servant position, I said, the pieces falling into place. The blood oath. You were binding me to you. Weber nodded, looking almost pleased, like a teacher with a quick student. It's a start, but there are stronger bindings, ones that will ensure the Perez line doesn't escape Crimson Vale again. My skin crawled at the implication. My mother got away from you. Your mother, Weber said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness, fled 20 years ago, though things were different then. Security was looser, the magic was weaker. He gestured around us, but I learned from my father's mistakes. I've spent 2 decades preparing for this moment. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the panic rising in my throat. The other packs will do nothing, Weber cut in. Not for an unaffiliated Omega who willingly accepted sanctuary, not for a servant who swore a blood oath. His smile was all teeth now. Face it, Christina. There's nowhere left for you to run, no one coming to help you. You're exactly where I've been ensuring you'd end up since the day your mother disappeared. The truth of it settled over me like a shroud. Every road I'd traveled, every door that had closed in my face, every seeming stroke of bad luck, all of it manipulated. All of it leading me here, to this room, to this man, to this trap I'd walked into believing I had no other choice. You engineered my desperation, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. Weber's smile widened, satisfied. And it worked perfectly. Weber tossed the journal onto his desk and turned back to me with something new in his eyes. Something hungry that made my skin crawl. The blood oath binding you to me, he said, his voice gone soft in a way that scared me more than his shouting ever could. It's not just about ensuring your obedience, Christina. I backed up until I hit the bookshelf, my palms pressed against the rough wood, searching for something solid to hold onto while the room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. What are you talking about? My voice came out steadier than I felt. He smiled, showing too many teeth. Did you think it was just a simple servitude binding? No. Our shaman Walter is far more skilled than that. Weber took a step toward me. The ritual we performed has been preparing your body all this time. Preparing? The word tasted wrong in my mouth. For compatibility. Another step closer. You see, Omegas like you, prime bloodlines. You're meant to mate with alphas. It's the natural order. But sometimes nature needs encouragement. My stomach dropped as his meaning sank in. You're saying the oath is changing me? He nodded, looking pleased like I was a particularly bright child who'd solved a puzzle. Making you biologically compatible with me as a mate. By the next full moon, your body will override whatever foolish notions of independence you cling to. Your heat will synchronize with my rut, and your natural mating instincts will recognize me as your alpha. I felt sick. The thought of my own body betraying me, of being rewired from the inside without my knowledge or consent. It was worse than any physical cage. You can't do that. I pressed harder against the bookshelf, wishing I could disappear into it. That's not possible. It's already happening. His eyes flicked down to my neck, where my pulse hammered. Haven't you noticed how your scent changes when I'm near? How your body responds to my proximity? The oath is working as intended. And the worst part was, he wasn't entirely wrong. I had felt strange these past weeks, heightened senses, unexpected flushes of heat. I'd blamed it on stress, on fear, on anything but this. I'll never be your mate. The words came out as a growl, something primal rising in me. I don't care what magic you use. I will fight it. Weber laughed, the sound bouncing off the walls of his study. You misunderstand. You won't have a choice. The oath doesn't control your mind. It doesn't need to. It's changing your biology. When the time comes, your body will beg for what only I can provide. Rage bloomed inside me then, not the hot, quick anger I'd felt before, but something deeper and colder. A fury that started in my bones and spread outward until my skin felt too tight to contain it. I felt the binding magic stir inside me. Responding to my anger, it pulsed behind my ribs. A warning pressure that should have driven me to my knees. The oath was designed to ensure compliance, to punish defiance, but something wasn't right. Instead of crushing down on me, the pressure seemed to waver, like two opposing forces meeting in the middle of my chest. Weber noticed it too. His confident smile faltered for just a second. You feel that? That's the binding reminding you of your place. He straightened his shoulders. Don't fight it, Christina. It will only cause you pain. I should have been doubling over by now. Grace had told me how the oath would burn through your veins if you even thought about disobeying a direct command. But the pain wasn't overwhelming me. It was feeding something else inside me, something that had been sleeping until now. My wolf, not the conscious part that let me shift forms, but the deeper, wilder essence that I'd always kept carefully controlled. Weber stepped closer, misreading my silence for submission. That's better, he murmured. Accept what you are, what you were always meant to be. He reached out to touch my face, and I couldn't stop the snarl that ripped from my throat. His eyes widened, but his confidence returned quickly. He was so sure of his power, of the binding that held me. I am your alpha, he said, voice dropping into that compelling register that alphas use to command their pack. And you will accept your destiny as my mate and the mother of my heirs. Something cracked inside me then, not my resolve, but the binding itself. I felt it splinter along fault lines I hadn't known existed, magic fracturing under the pressure of a rage too vast to be contained by blood and symbols. My wolf surged forward with such force that I gasped. Not a physical transformation, there wasn't time for that, but a spiritual one. My most primal self rising to the surface of my consciousness and howling defiance. The binding shattered. I felt it break apart inside me, the magic that had wound through my veins now splintering into 1,000 razor-sharp pieces. For one breathless moment, everything was still. Then the backlash hit. Magic has rules. Even the oldest, darkest kinds follow patterns, have consequences. When a binding breaks naturally, it simply dissolves. But when it's shattered by force, that power has to go somewhere. It exploded outward from me in a wave I could actually see, a ripple in the air that caught Weber square in the chest. His eyes went wide with genuine shock as the force lifted him off his feet and threw him across the room like he weighed nothing. He hit the far wall hard, books tumbling from shelves around him as he slid to the floor. A painting crashed down beside him, the frame splintering on impact. I stood frozen, my hands pressed to my chest where the binding had been, feeling the strange emptiness where magic had pulsed only moments before. Weber tried to push himself upright, but something was wrong. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated. When he looked up at me, blood trickled from his nose and the corner of his mouth. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice stripped of all its former power. I didn't know. I'd heard stories about blood oaths being broken, but never like this. Never with consequences that seemed to affect the one who had cast the binding. As I watched, Weber's body shuddered. He curled in on himself, a wounded animal sound escaping his throat. The air around him seemed to waver, the way it does above hot pavement in summer. His power, that overwhelming alpha presence that had filled every room he entered, was destabilizing, flickering like a faulty light. "The binding," he gasped. staring at his shaking hands. It was anchoring me. Understanding dawned slowly. Weber hadn't just been binding me to him. He'd been using the connection to stabilize something in himself. Without it, whatever control he'd maintained over his power was slipping. He looked up at me again, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw fear in Gregory Weber's eyes. Blood dripped onto the polished floor beneath him, spreading in a thin crimson pool that reflected the afternoon light from the window. I stood over him, free and unbound, while the most feared alpha in the territory lay vulnerable and bleeding at my feet. The door burst open so hard it slammed against the wall. Grace stood there first, eyes wide as dinner plates, Stephen right behind her with his mouth hanging open. 3 other servants crowded the doorway behind them, all of them frozen like they'd walked in on something they weren't supposed to see. And I guess they had. What happened? Grace whispered, her eyes darting between me standing there and Weber sprawled on the floor, blood trickling from his nose, looking like someone had knocked the stuffing out of him. He lied, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The blood oath. It wasn't what he said it was. Stephen took a cautious step into the room. You broke it? That's not possible. Weber groaned, trying to push himself up from the floor. His arms trembled under his weight like a newborn fawn's legs. Never thought I'd see the mighty alpha looking so pathetic. Don't just stand there, Weber snarled at them. But something was different. His voice didn't have that same commanding weight to it. The servants didn't jump to attention like they usually did when he barked orders. They just stood there, staring. It's his power, I said, the realization hitting me like a truck. The binding wasn't just to control me, it was feeding him somehow. Grace took another step into the room. What do you mean? I glanced at Weber, who was glaring at me with pure hatred now. He's been binding Omegas for years, hasn't he? Using our energy to boost his own strength. I turned to the servants. That's why he's so much stronger than other alphas. That's why he can control so much territory. It's not him, it's stolen power. Weber lunged at me then, but it was a sad attempt. He stumbled, barely making it 2 steps before his knees buckled. You have no idea what you're talking about, he spat. But the panic in his eyes told me I'd hit the nail on the head. Stephen moved beside me, keeping his distance from Weber. Is that true? You've been using Omega bindings to strengthen yourself. The old alphas all did it, Weber said through gritted teeth. It's our right. Omegas exist to serve the pack, to serve me. And what happens to them after? Grace asked quietly. The other Omegas you've bound? Weber didn't answer, but his eyes flickered to the cabinet where I'd found the journal. My stomach twisted as I remembered all those names I'd seen in his records. How many had come before me? How many had he used up and discarded? He's been tracking Omega bloodlines, I said, moving to the cabinet and pulling out the journal. My hands weren't shaking anymore. He's been hunting specific families, prime Omega bloodlines, he calls them. My mother escaped him 20 years ago, and he's been looking for me ever since. I held up the journal, flipping it open to show them the pages of family trees, the circled names, the clinical notes about breeding potential. Grace made a small choked sound. Is that why some servants leave looking like empty shells? I finished for her. Yeah, I think he drains them until there's nothing left. The room went silent. Weber was still on the floor, but his eyes darted between us all, calculating. Even weakened, I could see his mind working, trying to find a way out. He can't hurt you right now, I said, looking at each of the servants. The binding's broken, and whatever power he was stealing from other Omegas is fading. But it won't last forever. I took a deep breath. So we've got a choice to make, right now. We can help him up, pretend this never happened, and wait for him to bind another Omega to get his strength back. Or we can end this. End it how? Stephen asked. The Pack Council. They need to know what he's been doing. I gestured at the journal in my hand. We have evidence. We have witnesses. We can stop him for good. Weber let out a harsh laugh. They'll never believe you. A nobody Omega against an Alpha? The Council won't even hear you out. Grace surprised me then. She stepped forward, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. They'll hear all of us. The Alpha can be challenged if enough Pack members bring evidence of corruption. Old law, Stephen added, nodding. Elder Morales knows it well. She's always been suspicious of how quickly you rose to power after your father. I watched Weber's face fall as he realized what was happening. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. And for once, he couldn't force or threaten his way out of it. So what's it going to be, I asked the room. Help me stop him, or wait for him to regain control? Grace was the first to step forward. I've seen 3 Omegas come and go since I've been here, each one left different. Hollow. She stood beside me. I'll testify. Stephen joined us next. My sister was an Omega. She disappeared 5 years ago, said she was going to seek sanctuary with a northern pack. His voice cracked. Her name's in that book, isn't it? I flipped through the pages and found it, Amanda Hart, with a small X drawn through it. I nodded, and something in Stephen's eyes hardened. One by one, the other servants joined us. Weber watched it happen, his face twisting with rage. I'll kill every last one of you, he snarled. But the threat sounded empty now. Bind him, I said. Use whatever you can find. We need to get to Elder Morales before his lieutenants realize something's wrong. Stephen and 2 others used curtain cords to tie Weber's hands and feet, while Grace ran to fetch Michelle Morales. I stayed with the journal, reading through it more carefully now, feeling sick at how methodical Weber had been. Generations of Omega families tracked and targeted, including mine. It took less than an hour for Elder Morales to arrive. She swept into the room like a storm, her silver hair pulled back tight, her eyes taking in the scene with sharp intelligence. 2 pack enforcers flanked her, their expressions grim. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, her gaze landing on Weber tied up on the floor. Corruption of power, Elder, I said, stepping forward with the journal. Alpha Weber has been using forbidden blood magic to enhance his strength. He's been tracking and binding Omegas for years, using us to fuel his power. Weber tried to lunge forward despite his bonds. She's lying. This is treason. Elder Morales held up a hand for silence, her eyes never leaving mine. These are serious accusations, girl. What proof do you have? I handed her the journal. His own records. Generations of Omega bloodlines he's been tracking. Notes on the binding rituals. How much power he could extract from each of us. I pointed to my name in the book. He orchestrated my arrival here, manipulated events so I'd have nowhere else to go. Then he bound me with a blood oath he claimed was for servitude, but was actually preparing me as his mate. Morales's eyes widened slightly as she flipped through the pages. And the binding? You broke it? I nodded. When I discovered what he was doing, something happened. The magic shattered. Impossible, Weber spat. No Omega can break a blood oath. She's lying. Christina, Elder Morales said, her voice sharp. Come forward. I stepped closer, and she placed her weathered hand on my forehead. I felt a gentle probing, like fingers sifting through sand, searching. The binding is gone, she confirmed, surprise evident in her voice, completely shattered. She turned to the servants. You all witnessed this? They nodded. And one by one, they told their stories. The Omegas who had come before me, how they changed, how they eventually disappeared. Stephen spoke of his sister. Grace described the pattern she'd observed over years of service. Throughout it all, Weber grew more desperate. I command you all to stop this at once, he shouted. I am your alpha. But his words had no effect. The power that had made others cower was gone, leaving only a desperate man shouting empty threats. An emergency council will convene immediately, Elder Morales declared. All of you will testify. She nodded to the enforcers, who moved to haul Weber to his feet. This isn't over, Weber hissed. His eyes locked on mine as they dragged him up. Christina Perez, I command you to be silent. The words hung in the air between us. For a split second, I felt the ghost of the binding, a whisper of what should have been an overwhelming compulsion, but it faded like smoke, leaving nothing but my own free will behind. I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the fear hiding behind his rage. I don't belong to you, I said quietly. I never did. The enforcers dragged Weber from the room, his threats echoing down the hallway. Elder Morales gave me a long, appraising look. You've done something unprecedented today, she said. Breaking a blood oath? It shouldn't be possible. She closed the journal with a snap. The council will want to hear everything. I nodded, suddenly exhausted but determined. I'll tell them whatever they need to know. As we left Weber's study, following Elder Morales to the council chambers, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Not just relief or freedom, but something stronger. Power that was all my own. Chapter 7. They stuck Weber in a holding cell under the Great Hall while the council got together. I'd never seen the underground rooms before, didn't even know they existed till Elder Morales led me down a narrow staircase hidden behind a tapestry. The air smelled musty and cold, like wet stone and old secrets. Made sense they'd have places to hold people who broke pack law, but it gave me the creeps thinking about how many others might have been locked up down there over the years. Weber sat on a wooden bench in his cell, staring at me with pure hatred. His fancy clothes were rumpled, blood dried around his nostrils. Elder Morales had stationed 2 enforcers outside his cell, big guys with serious faces who wouldn't look at their former alpha. The council will convene within the hour, Elder Morales told me, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. You'll need to testify about what you experienced and discovered. I nodded, clutching Weber's journal against my chest. The leather binding felt warm under my fingers, like it carried some heat of its own. I'll tell them everything. Weber laughed from his cell, a bitter sound that echoed off the stone walls. They won't believe you. I've led this pack for 15 years. Elder Morales turned to him, her face hard. Gregory, I suggest you save your words for the council. Your situation is grave enough without adding disrespect. She led me back upstairs to wait. Grace brought me tea that I didn't drink, just held between my palms for the warmth. Stephen paced by the window, glancing at me every few minutes like he couldn't believe I was still in one piece. What happens now? I asked nobody in particular. Stephen stopped pacing. The council will decide. If they find him guilty of what you're saying, he shook his head. I've never heard of an alpha being removed like this. Grace sat beside me, her knee bouncing with nervous energy. Morales has suspected something wasn't right for years. She just needed proof. An hour crawled by before they came for me. The council chambers were at the back of the great hall, a circular room with a massive round table carved from a single oak trunk. 5 elders sat around it, including Morales. They looked ancient and stern in the dim light of oil lamps. A chair waited for me in the center of their circle. Cristina Perez, Elder Morales said, her voice formal now, you have brought serious allegations against Alpha Weber. The council requires your testimony. I set the journal on the table, open to the pages with my family tree. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. I told them everything, how Weber had manipulated my rejections from other packs, how he'd used the blood oath to bind me, how I'd discovered he'd been tracking my bloodline for decades. He said the binding was changing me, I said, swallowing hard, making me compatible with him as a mate, but it was also feeding him power. One of the male elders, a white-haired man with deep wrinkles, leaned forward. You're claiming he used omega bindings to artificially enhance his alpha abilities? Yes, and when the binding broke, his power broke with it. They asked more questions, so many that my throat went dry. They called in Grace and Stephen next, who confirmed what they'd seen of Weber's treatment of other omegas. 3 more servants testified after them. Then they brought in Weber. He'd composed himself, straightened his clothes, wiped the blood from his face. He walked into the room like he still owned it. These accusations are ridiculous, he started, his voice steady and commanding. This Omega came to us desperate and homeless. I offered her sanctuary and employment, and this is how she repays our generosity, with lies and manipulation. The council listened silently as he spun his version, painting me as unstable and ungrateful. He explained away the journal as historical research and claimed the binding was a standard oath of loyalty. She attacked me, he finished, pointing at me. She somehow broke the oath and used magic against me. If anything, she should be punished. Elder Morales tapped her finger on the journal pages. And these notes about prime omega bloodlines and breeding potential? The tracking of her mother's movements after she fled your father. Weber's face twitched. My father had legitimate interest in certain bloodlines for pack strength, nothing sinister. Walter Turner is waiting outside, another elder said quietly, the shaman who performed the binding ritual. Shall we hear from him? Weber's confidence cracked. Walter performs dozens of bindings. He won't remember the specifics of one ritual. They brought Walter in anyway, a stooped old man with trembling hands who wouldn't meet Weber's eyes. He confirmed everything. The ritual wasn't a standard loyalty oath, but an ancient binding meant to link omegas to alphas at a fundamental level. It transfers energy, Walter admitted, staring at the floor. The alpha gains strength from the omega's life force. It's forbidden magic. I should have refused. The council dismissed us after that, keeping Weber inside. I waited in the antechamber with Grace and Stephen, all of us silent. An hour passed. 2. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since morning. Finally, Elder Morales emerged. The council has reached its decision. Please return. We filed back in. Weber stood rigid before the table, his hands clenched at his sides. Gregory Weber, Elder Morales announced. This council finds you guilty of corruption, misuse of power, and forbidden blood magic. You have betrayed the trust of this pack and violated our most sacred laws. Weber's face went pale, but he didn't speak. You are hereby stripped of your alpha status, Morales continued, and banished from Crimson Vale territory. You have until sunrise to gather personal belongings and leave. If you return, you will be treated as a hostile intruder. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush my lungs. Weber's shoulders sagged, then tensed again. You can't do this, he said, but his voice had lost its power. This pack needs me. This pack needs healing from your abuse, Morales replied firmly. Take him to gather his things. 2 enforcers will escort him to the border at dawn. They led Weber out. He didn't look at me as he passed. The council turned to me next. Elder Morales' face softened slightly. Cristina Perez, you have done this pack a service by exposing corruption that has festered for too long. The council offers you permanent sanctuary within Crimson Vale. You would have protected status and could remain as long as you wish. I blinked, surprised by the offer. A place to belong, safety, the things I'd been searching for when I first crossed their border. But something didn't sit right. I thought about my mother, how she'd fled these territories 20 years ago rather than be bound to Weber's father, how she'd chosen uncertainty over captivity. Thank you, I said slowly, but I think I need to leave. Surprise flashed across Elder Morales' face. You're certain? Winter approaches, and you would be welcome here. I nodded, feeling more sure with each passing second. I appreciate the offer, but I came here looking for protection, when I should have been looking for my own strength. I need to make my own way. Stephen started to protest from behind me, but Grace touched his arm, silencing him. As you wish, Elder Morales said. When do you plan to depart? Tomorrow, I decided. After Weber's gone. That night, I packed my few belongings in my worn backpack. Grace gave me extra food, and Stephen pressed a small knife into my hand. Just in case, he said, not meeting my eyes. The territories can be dangerous. I slept better than I had in weeks, the weight of the binding completely gone. In the morning, I stood at the same gate where I'd entered, looking out at the path that disappeared between massive oaks. The guards, different ones this time, nodded respectfully as they opened the gate. Good luck, one of them said. I stepped through the gate, feeling the cool autumn air on my face. Unlike when I'd arrived, desperate and afraid, I walked away with my head high. I had no destination in mind, no pack waiting to take me in. But I had something better, the knowledge that I possessed a strength no one could bind against their will. I thought about my mother as I followed the path into the forest. Maybe she'd felt this same sense of freedom when she fled all those years ago. Maybe someday I'd find her and tell her how her courage had taught me the most important lesson. That true freedom comes from choosing your own path, even when that path leads into uncertainty. Behind me, Crimson Vale grew smaller with each step. Ahead lay the unknown. I adjusted my backpack and kept walking.